Lena never wanted a life full of attention. She was the quiet one in her family, the kind of girl who listened more than she spoke. She loved simple things, walking through the market with her mother, watering the plants every morning, and reading old novels her father collected when he was young. Her world was small but peaceful, until the day her sister's choices turned everything upside down. Clara, her older sister, was the opposite in every way. She was bold, charming, and always dressed perfectly. People in their small town admired her confidence. She had big dreams, always talking about moving to the city and living in luxury. To their parents, Clara was the one who would lift the family's name higher. Lena didn't mind living in her sister's shadow. She had accepted long ago that Clara was the star everyone looked at, and she was just the one who stood behind, clapping quietly. When Clara announced she was getting married, it felt like no surprise. She said she had met someone special, a man named Daniel, who worked in business and had a calm personality. He wasn't from town, but he had been visiting often because of work. Clara said he was smart, well-mannered, and comfortable, and which was her word for financially stable. Their parents were thrilled. Finally, a chance to connect with someone outside their circle, someone who could give Clara the life she always wanted. The wedding date was set quickly. Preparations filled the house, sewing dresses, arranging decorations, and making guest lists. Everyone was excited except Lena. She didn't dislike Daniel, but something about the whole thing felt rushed. Clara often talked about her fiancé, but her stories didn't match up. Sometimes she said he worked in finance, other times in construction. Sometimes she said he lived alone, other times that he had family abroad. Lena noticed these things but kept them to herself. She didn't want to cause trouble. As the days went by, Clara became distant. She spent long hours outside the house and stopped answering questions about the wedding. When Lena asked if everything was okay, she brushed her off with a forced smile. "You wouldn't understand," Clara said one night, "but soon, everything will make sense." Those words stayed with Lena. There was something in her sister's tone, a mix of fear and guilt, that made her uneasy. The morning of the wedding rehearsal, Clara didn't come home. At first, everyone thought she was just late, maybe out getting her hair done. But as the hours passed, panic filled the air. Their mother called her friends. Their father went to the police station. No one had seen her. The sun went down and the whispers began. Some said she got cold feet. Others said she ran away with someone else. The humiliation was too much for their parents to bear. Their father sat in silence while their mother cried into her hands, repeating over and over, "What will people say?" By the next morning, the house was filled with relatives, all whispering and pointing fingers. The guests were already in town. The decorations were up. The wedding could not be canceled without causing a scandal. That's when their uncle made the suggestion that changed Lena's life forever. "She can take her place," he said, pointing at Lena. "They're sisters, close enough in age. The families have already agreed. If Daniel is willing, it will save our name." Lena froze. The room went quiet. Her mother looked at her with tired eyes and said softly, "Please, child, do this for us." She couldn't believe what she was hearing. How could she marry her sister's fiancé? It felt wrong. But the fear in her parents' eyes broke her. She knew what reputation meant in their community. A canceled wedding would follow them for years. Her father's business could suffer. Their name would be ruined. She swallowed her tears and nodded slowly. A few hours later, Daniel arrived. He looked calm, too calm, for a man whose bride had disappeared. When her father explained the situation, Daniel didn't react with anger. He only asked one question. "Does she agree?" All eyes turned to Lena. She nodded again, her voice lost in her throat. Daniel studied her for a moment and said quietly, "Then we'll proceed." His tone was flat, unreadable. Lena couldn't tell if he was hurt, angry, or just indifferent. The ceremony felt like a dream she couldn't wake from. The guests whispered as she walked down the aisle wearing her sister's dress. Some looked shocked, others curious. The priest stumbled over the names, and Lena's hands trembled as she repeated the vows. Daniel stood beside her, tall and composed, his expression impossible to read. When he placed the ring on her finger, she felt a strange chill, like a door had closed behind her forever. That night, they left for his home. She expected an ordinary house, maybe a small apartment, something simple. But as the car drove farther from town, the roads became smoother and the houses larger. When they finally stopped, Lena stared in disbelief. Before her stood a grand estate surrounded by tall trees and a quiet lake. The gate opened automatically as they entered. It didn't feel like the home of a regular man. It felt like a hidden world. Inside, the house was silent and beautiful. Marble floors, tall windows, and paintings that looked expensive. Everything smelled faintly of cedar and something floral. A few servants greeted them politely. They called Daniel Sir and treated him with a level of respect that confused her. He had told her nothing about his life before the wedding. Who was he, really? Why had Clara never mentioned this? He showed her to a room, large, clean, and decorated in soft colors. "This will be your space," he said. "You can change anything you like." His tone was formal, almost distant, as if they were business partners instead of husband and wife. Lena wanted to ask questions, but her voice failed her. She just nodded. When he left, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands. The wedding ring glimmered in the dim light. It felt heavy. Days turned into weeks. Daniel was polite but cold. He spent most of his time in his study or out of the house. When they shared meals, he asked about her comfort, her health, but never about her feelings. She tried to start conversations, but his answers were short. The only thing that softened him slightly was when she talked about her parents. He listened then, really listened, his eyes thoughtful. But whenever she mentioned Clara, he would go silent. Lena tried to adjust to her new life, though it never felt real. The servants treated her with respect, but also with caution. She heard them whisper sometimes, wondering who she really was. One afternoon, while exploring the house, she found a locked door near the end of the hallway. It looked like an office, and curiosity burned in her chest. She turned the handle. It didn't move. She told herself it wasn't her place to ask, but the mystery stayed in her mind. Sometimes, late at night, she could hear Daniel talking quietly on the phone. His tone was calm but serious. Once she overheard him mention her sister's name. That made her heart race. What connection did he still have to Clara? Did he know where she went? Was he angry or hiding something else? The questions circled in her mind like restless birds. One evening, she gathered enough courage to ask him directly. They were sitting in the dining room, a soft glow from the chandelier above. "Did you love her?" she asked quietly. Daniel looked up from his plate, his eyes steady on hers. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he said, "I thought I did." His voice was calm but held a strange sadness. But love built on lies never lasts. That was all he said before standing up and leaving the table. Lena sat there, confused and even more curious. Lies, what lies? The days that followed were strange. Daniel began to act differently, not warm but less distant. He asked if she needed anything for her room, if she wanted to learn how to drive, if she liked certain foods. Small things, but enough to show he was trying in his quiet way. Lena appreciated it, but couldn't shake off the feeling that something deeper was hidden beneath his calm surface. One morning, while walking in the garden, she met the housekeeper, an older woman named Mrs. Grayson. She had kind eyes and treated Lena gently, almost like a daughter. As they talked, Mrs. Grayson mentioned something that made Lena's heart skip. "He used to be much colder," she said, adjusting the flowers. "After what happened before, I didn't think he'd ever let anyone in again." When Lena asked what she meant, the woman simply smiled and said, "It's not my story to tell." That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She walked to the window and looked at the garden under the moonlight. The lake shimmered softly. Somewhere inside that big house was a man full of secrets, and she was now part of his life, whether she wanted it or not. She didn't know if she should fear him or trust him. But she knew one thing. Her sister had left something behind, something more than just a broken engagement. The next day, a letter arrived at the mansion. It had no return address. The servant handed it to Daniel during breakfast. He read it silently, his face tightening with every line. Then, without a word, he folded it and slipped it into his pocket. But later, when he left for work, Lena found the torn envelope in the trash. Curiosity got the better of her. She carefully pulled out the small piece of paper still inside. There were only a few words visible, written in her sister's handwriting. "You don't know what you've done." Lena's heart pounded. What did it mean? Who was the message really for, Daniel or her? Was her sister still watching them? The mystery deepened with every passing day. And though fear lingered, a strange determination grew inside her. She needed to know the truth, not just about Daniel, but about why her sister had run away. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, Lena began to find comfort in her new surroundings. She spent mornings reading in the garden and evenings helping the kitchen staff. Daniel was still reserved, but sometimes she caught him watching her quietly, as if studying her. There were moments when their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, something fragile but real. It confused her even more. One evening, a storm rolled in. Thunder echoed through the hills, and rain lashed against the windows. Daniel came home late, soaked but calm. When he entered the house, he saw her trying to close a window that the wind had forced open. Without a word, he helped her. Their hands brushed briefly, and she felt a spark she couldn't explain. For a moment, they just stood there, the sound of rain surrounding them. Then he said softly, "You're stronger than you think, Lena." It was the first time he had spoken her name like that, gently with meaning. After he left the room, Lena stood still for a long time, her heart racing. Maybe he wasn't the cold stranger she thought he was. Maybe there was pain behind that calmness, and maybe, without realizing it, she was beginning to care. But as she turned off the light that night, she couldn't shake off the words she had seen in the torn letter. "You don't know what you've done." The mystery of her sister's disappearance still lingered, like a shadow in the corner of every quiet room. And deep down, Lena knew this was only the beginning of a story that would change everything. The morning after the storm, the air around the mansion felt different. The rain had washed the gardens clean, leaving everything shining under the early sunlight. Lena walked through the wet grass barefoot, feeling the cold dew between her toes. For the first time since she had come to this house, she felt a strange calm inside. Something had shifted. Maybe it was the way Daniel had spoken to her last night, or maybe it was just time softening the edges of her fear. She had begun to see sides of Daniel that she hadn't noticed before. He wasn't just distant, he was careful. Every word he said seemed measured, like he was afraid of breaking something fragile. At first she thought it was just politeness, but now she sensed something deeper, a kind of sadness that never left his eyes. During breakfast, he was reading the newspaper as usual, while she sipped her tea quietly. He looked up once and asked, "Did you sleep well?" His tone was soft, almost hesitant. She nodded. "Yes, I did. You?" He gave a faint smile. "Better than most nights." Then he went back to his paper, and the silence between them didn't feel as heavy as before. Lena began to explore more of the mansion during the day. Each room told a story. There were photographs of buildings, awards, and a few old family portraits. But she noticed something strange. None of them included Daniel himself. It was as if he wanted to erase his own image from his life. The servants spoke little, but she could feel their loyalty to him. Whenever she mentioned his name, their faces softened with respect. He was not just their employer. He was someone they trusted deeply. One afternoon, while walking through the long corridor upstairs, she noticed the locked study door again. It drew her in like a secret she wasn't supposed to know. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the handle. Something inside her whispered to open it, to find out what he was hiding, but she didn't, not yet. Instead, she turned away, reminding herself that trust was built slowly. Still, the mystery burned quietly inside her. In the evenings, Daniel started spending more time with her. They would eat together, sometimes talk about small things, the weather, the garden, or the news. Once she asked him about his work. He told her he was part of a company that managed several construction projects in different cities. His answers were brief but honest. He didn't talk about money or success. He talked about responsibility, about the weight of choices. She realized then that his silence wasn't arrogance, it was protection. He carried too many secrets, and not all of them were his own. Weeks passed, and Lena's life slowly took shape. She began to help around the house, especially in the kitchen. Mrs. Grayson, the housekeeper, often told her stories about the staff and the house's history. "This place has seen a lot," she said one day, chopping vegetables. "It used to belong to his grandfather. Built it with his own hands. The family lost a lot during hard times, but your husband brought it back to life." Lena smiled faintly. "He doesn't talk much about himself." Mrs. Grayson looked at her kindly. "That's because he's seen too much. He's the kind who keeps his pain quiet." Lena thought about that all night. She wanted to ask him what kind of pain he carried, but she didn't dare. Instead, she watched him from a distance. The way he worked late, the way he stared out the window when he thought no one was watching, the way his hand sometimes trembled slightly when he read letters. Something had scarred him deeply. One morning a man came to visit. He was tall, wearing a formal suit and looked like someone important. The staff treated him with great respect. Lena watched from the living room as he and Daniel went into the study. The door closed behind them. They talked for hours, their voices low but tense. At one point she heard the man say something that made her freeze. If the press finds out what happened, it'll be chaos. Then Daniel's calm voice replied, "No one will. Not as long as I'm alive." When the man left, Daniel stayed inside for a long time. That night he didn't join her for dinner. She waited until everyone was asleep before walking quietly toward the study. The door was slightly open this time. She hesitated but then pushed it just enough to see inside. He was sitting by the window, a glass of water beside him, staring at an old photograph in his hand. She could only see part of it, but she recognized the other person in the photo immediately. It was Clara, her sister. Lena stepped back, her heart pounding. The photo slipped from his hand and he looked up, startled. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly, not angry, just tired. She froze in the doorway. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to." He shook his head, setting the photo on the desk. "It's fine." Then after a pause he said, "You're her sister. You have a right to wonder." She looked at him carefully. "Why do you still have her picture?" He stared at it for a moment. "Because it reminds me of everything I almost lost and everything I found instead." His voice cracked slightly at the end. He stood and walked toward her. "Your sister. She wasn't who she pretended to be, Lena. She wanted something from me. When I found out the truth, it was already too late." Lena didn't know what to say. "What truth?" she asked quietly. He took a deep breath. "That she never loved me. She loved what she thought I could give her." His words hit her like a wave. All this time she had wondered why Clara left. Now pieces began to fit together, though not completely. Daniel continued, "When your family offered you to take her place, I agreed, because I didn't want the scandal to ruin either of us. But after the wedding, I realized you were nothing like her." He looked at her then, and something unspoken passed between them, something raw and honest. "You didn't want this life, did you?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "No, but I'm here now." He nodded slowly, almost with regret. "You don't have to stay if you don't want to." But Lena didn't answer. She walked out quietly, leaving him alone with his memories. The following days were heavy with silence. Daniel didn't bring up the conversation again, and neither did she. But something had changed. She no longer saw him as just a stranger she was forced to marry. She saw the loneliness behind his calm face. She saw a man who had been betrayed but still tried to do the right thing. And in her heart she felt a small pull toward him, a pull she didn't want to admit. One evening she found him in the garden, fixing one of the old benches. He looked up as she approached. "I didn't know you could do that," she said with a small smile. He laughed quietly. "There are a lot of things you don't know about me." She hesitated, then said, "Maybe you could tell me some of them." He looked at her thoughtfully, then nodded. Maybe. They began to talk more after that. About simple things at first, his travels, her childhood, the books she liked. Slowly, the distance between them started to fade. Lena found herself laughing more, something she hadn't done in months. Daniel seemed lighter too, as if he was beginning to let go of the weight he carried. But beneath the calm days, a shadow still lingered. One morning, Lena received a small package delivered to the gate. There was no name on it. Inside was a silver bracelet, her sister's bracelet, the same one Clara had worn on the day of the rehearsal before she vanished. Along with it was a note that said, "You can't hide the past forever." Her hands trembled as she read it. She showed it to Daniel that evening. His face darkened as he read the note. "Where did this come from?" he asked sharply. "It was left at the gate," she said. "Do you think it's from her?" He didn't answer. Instead, he locked the note and bracelet in his desk drawer and said, "If it is, she wants attention. Don't give it to her." But Lena couldn't stop thinking about it. What if Clara was nearby? What if she had been watching all along? And what did she mean by "you can't hide the past forever"? There were too many questions, and Daniel wasn't giving her any answers. That night, she went for a walk near the lake. The water reflected the moonlight, and the wind was cool against her face. She sat on the bench Daniel had repaired and tried to clear her mind. But suddenly she heard footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, but no one was there. Only the sound of leaves rustling. For a moment she thought she saw a shadow move among the trees, but when she blinked, it was gone. She rushed back inside, her heart racing. Daniel was in the hallway. "What happened?" he asked. "Someone was outside," she said breathlessly. He frowned. "Stay here," he ordered and went out with a flashlight. She waited, her hands cold, listening to the echo of his steps fading into the dark. After what felt like forever, he returned. "No one's there," he said calmly, though his eyes told her he didn't believe it either. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the letter, the bracelet, the photograph, every little piece that didn't fit. The next morning, she decided to find answers herself. When Daniel left for work, she went into the study. Her hands shook as she opened the desk drawer. Inside were documents, letters, and old photographs. Most were business papers, but at the bottom was a file labeled CR. She opened it. Inside were several letters in Clara's handwriting. The first one began with, "You promised me a different life." The words stung. Lena read the rest slowly, realizing her sister had planned everything. Clara had discovered who Daniel really was long before the engagement. She had known about his wealth and influence. The engagement wasn't love, it was a deal she thought would make her rich. But something had gone wrong. The last letter ended abruptly with, "I can't do this anymore. He's not who I thought." Lena put the letters back, her hands trembling. The truth was messy and painful. Her sister had used him, and yet Daniel had chosen to protect her family instead of exposing the truth. When she heard the sound of the front door opening, she panicked and hurried out of the study. That evening, as they sat for dinner, Daniel looked at her quietly and said, "You went into my study." It wasn't a question. She froze, unable to deny it. He sighed. "You were bound to find out eventually." He looked tired, older somehow. "Now you know why she left." Lena's voice was small. "You could have told me." He nodded. "I could have. But I didn't want you to hate her." She looked at him for a long moment. "I don't hate her," she said softly. "I just wish she hadn't run away." Daniel's eyes softened. "So do I." For a while, neither of them spoke. Then he said, "There's more you don't know, but I'll tell you when the time is right." She wanted to ask what he meant, but his tone made her stop. He wasn't hiding things out of cruelty. He was protecting her from something bigger, something still waiting to unfold. That night, as she lay in bed, Lena couldn't stop thinking about everything she had learned. Her life had changed so fast, forced into marriage, drawn into secrets, and now living in a world where truth and lies tangled together. She looked out the window, watching the moonlight spread across the garden. Somewhere out there, her sister was still a part of this story, and deep inside, she knew it was far from over. Days passed after that tense evening, but the silence between Lena and Daniel felt different now. It wasn't the same cold distance from the early days of their marriage. It was heavy, filled with unspoken truth. Each time she looked at him, she saw more than the quiet man she had been forced to marry. She saw someone broken by betrayal, and yet trying to keep his world from falling apart. The mansion had a strange calmness during those days. The staff moved softly, as if they too sensed the tension that filled the air. Lena often spent her mornings in the garden, sitting by the lake and watching the reflection of the tall trees ripple across the water. That was the only place she could think clearly. Everything she had learned about her sister, about Daniel, and about the lies that brought them together. None of it made complete sense yet. There was still something missing. One morning, as she was trimming a few wildflowers near the path, Mrs. Grayson came up to her carrying a basket of fresh fruit. "You've been quiet lately," she said kindly. "You used to talk to me while I worked." Lena smiled faintly. "Just thinking too much, I guess." Mrs. Grayson nodded knowingly. "Sometimes thinking is the hardest kind of work." She hesitated, then added softly, "You should know something. The night before your wedding, your husband was ready to cancel everything. It was only when he saw you agree that he changed his mind." Lena looked up in surprise. "He was going to cancel it?" "Yes," Mrs. Grayson said. "He told me he couldn't go through with a lie. But then you came, quiet and calm, and he said you reminded him of someone honest he used to know. I think that's why he stayed." That small piece of truth made Lena's chest tighten. She didn't know what kind of pain Daniel had been through before, but she could sense that her presence had somehow softened it. She thanked Mrs. Grayson and continued her walk by the lake, trying to absorb what she'd just learned. Later that afternoon, Daniel returned earlier than usual from work. His suit jacket was draped over his arm and his expression was serious but not angry. "Can we talk?" he asked. She nodded and led him to the sitting room. He stood by the window looking out at the fading sunlight. "I've been thinking," he began slowly. "You deserve to know everything, not just pieces." Lena's heart beat faster. She sat still, waiting. He took a deep breath. "Before your sister came into my life, I was already dealing with problems inside the company. There were people trying to use me, trying to get close because of what I owned. I was tired of fake faces, so I kept my life private. When Clara appeared, she seemed different. She was bold, confident, and made me laugh again. I believed her when she said she didn't care about my money. But that wasn't true." He paused, his voice tightening slightly. "She found out who I was before I told her. She went through my things, took photos of private documents, and even tried to sell the information to one of my competitors. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. She said she was doing it for us to secure her future. I ended the engagement that night, but the next morning she showed up again, crying, begging for another chance. I didn't know what to do. I told her I'd think about it. And before I could make a decision, she disappeared." Lena listened quietly, her fingers trembling. The truth hurt, even though she had already guessed part of it. "Did you tell my family?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "No, I didn't want to destroy her reputation. Your father's business could have been ruined if I said anything. That's why when they suggested you take her place, I agreed. I didn't want more pain for anyone. I just wanted peace." Lena sat in silence for a long moment. "And now?" she asked softly. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Now I just want honesty," he said. "No more lies between us. Whatever happens, I'd rather it be real." The words settled deeply in her heart. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't living in someone else's story. This life, strange and complicated as it was beginning to belong to her too. She nodded slowly. "Then no more lies," she said quietly. The days that followed felt lighter. Daniel started including her more in his life. He would take her along to charity events and company gatherings. People looked surprised when they saw her. Many had probably expected a glamorous woman by his side, not someone simple like her, but Daniel didn't seem to care. He would introduce her proudly, always with the same steady tone. "My wife, Lena." Each time he said it, her heart warmed a little more. At one such event, Lena overheard two women whispering nearby. "That's his wife? I thought he was supposed to marry the other one, the sister." "He was," the other replied quietly. But she ran away. This one took her place. Lucky girl. Their words stung, but she forced a small smile and turned away. She had grown used to whispers. People saw what they wanted to see, never what was real. When they got home that night, Daniel noticed her silence. "Did something happen?" he asked as they walked through the front door. "Nothing serious," she replied. "Just people talking." He looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "Let them talk. The only truth that matters is the one between us." That night, as she lay in bed, those words replayed in her mind. For the first time since her marriage began, she slept peacefully, but peace never lasted long in their story. One morning, a package arrived again, addressed to Daniel this time. The handwriting looked familiar to Lena, the same as the letter she had seen before. When Daniel opened it, his face went pale. Inside was a photograph of him and Clara, taken months before the wedding, along with a note that read, "If you think you're safe, think again." He folded the photo quietly, his jaw tight. "Who keeps sending these?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," he said firmly. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of worry he tried to hide. Maybe it's someone from the past trying to stir trouble. Ignore it. But Lena couldn't ignore it. She felt a chill run through her. Clara was out there somewhere, and someone knew their secret. That evening, Lena went to the study to think. The smell of old books and polished wood filled the air. On the desk, she noticed something new, a small envelope with her name written on it. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper that said, "Meet me at the old cafe near the station. Come alone." There was no signature, but her gut told her exactly who it was from. She sat there for a long time, torn between fear and curiosity. Part of her wanted to tell Daniel immediately, but another part of her needed to see her sister, to finally get answers face to face. The next morning, when Daniel left for work, Lena took a deep breath. They wrapped a scarf around her head and went into town. The cafe was quiet, half empty. She sat in the corner waiting. After 10 minutes, she heard the sound of footsteps. When she looked up, she saw her sister standing there, tired, thinner, but unmistakably Clara. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Clara sat down opposite her, her eyes scanning the room. "You look different," she said finally. "Married life suits you?" Her voice carried a bitter edge. Lena felt her throat tighten. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Clara leaned back, crossing her arms. "Doing what?" "Asking for what's mine." "Yours?" Lena said quietly. "You ran away." "I didn't run," Clara snapped. "I was forced to." "You think he's some innocent man? You don't know half of what he's capable of." Lena frowned. "You lied to him. You tried to sell his secrets." Clara's eyes widened in shock. "So he told you that part?" She gave a cold laugh. "Of course he did. Did he also tell you how he threatened me to keep quiet? Or how he made me sign papers that gave up everything I had?" Lena's heart pounded. "I don't believe you." "You don't have to," Clara said, standing up. "But you'll see soon enough. You think you're his wife, but you're just a replacement. When he's done with you, he'll move on like he did with me." Before Lena could say another word, Clara walked out of the cafe, disappearing into the crowd. The meeting left Lena shaken. She didn't know what to believe anymore. Her mind was filled with confusion. Could Daniel really have hidden something darker? Or was Clara just angry and trying to destroy what she couldn't have? When she returned home, Daniel was already there. He looked worried. "Where were you?" he asked. She hesitated, but then told him the truth. His expression hardened when she mentioned Clara. "You shouldn't have gone alone," he said. "She's trying to manipulate you." "What if she's telling the truth?" Lena asked quietly. Daniel turned away, running a hand through his hair. "There are things about the company that I can't explain yet. But believe me, I never threatened her. She left because she got caught in her own lies." His voice was firm, but Lena could hear the pain behind it. "I just want this to end," he said. "For both our sakes." That night, neither of them slept well. Lena stared at the ceiling, thinking of her sister's eyes. Cold, accusing, yet filled with something that looked like fear. She wondered what had really happened between them. Somewhere in all of it, the truth was hiding, waiting to be found. The next day, Daniel left early for a business trip. The mansion felt too big without him. As she walked through the halls, Lena stopped by the study again. She noticed the drawer he usually kept locked was slightly open. Inside, along with his usual papers, there was a folder she hadn't seen before. It was labeled "Confidential." Against her better judgment, she opened it. Inside were legal documents, agreements between Daniel and another company. But tucked among them was a smaller paper with Clara's name on it. It wasn't a threat, it was a protection order dated right before she disappeared. Lena's breath caught. Daniel hadn't tried to harm Clara. He had protected himself legally from her blackmail. Clara's story had been twisted. Everything she said at the cafe was another layer of deceit. When Daniel returned that evening, Lena was waiting for him. She showed him the paper silently. He looked at it, then met her eyes. "You went through my things again," he said softly. "I had to," she replied. "I needed to know who to believe." He nodded slowly. "And now?" "I believe you," she said firmly. "But I also believe she's not done yet." He sighed, sitting down. "You're right. She's desperate. And desperate people do dangerous things." The warmth between them that night was different. They didn't talk much, but the silence was filled with understanding. Lena knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Her sister was still out there, angry and unpredictable. But for the first time, she and Daniel were standing on the same side, not as strangers bound by an accident, but as two people fighting for the same truth. As the night grew quiet, Lena looked out at the lake again. The moonlight shimmered across the water just as it had on the night of the storm. Everything had changed since then. She was no longer the scared girl who had been forced into a marriage she didn't want. She had seen lies, betrayal, and pain, but she had also seen strength, honesty, and something like love beginning to bloom in the unlikeliest place. And deep down, she knew the story was far from over. The past hadn't finished with them yet. The next few weeks were strangely calm, almost too calm. It was as if the storm had passed, but Lena could still feel the heaviness in the air. Daniel spent long hours at work, often returning late, and each night when he walked in, she would study his face carefully, looking for signs of worry or exhaustion. He tried to hide it, but she could see it in his eyes. Something was still troubling him. One evening, while they were having dinner together, Daniel's phone rang. He looked at the screen, frowned slightly, and excused himself. His voice in the next room was quiet but tense. Lena tried not to listen, but a few words carried through the walls. "I told you not to call me directly." "Not now." Her chest tightened. When he returned, he looked calm again, as if nothing had happened. But she could tell that the calm was only a mask. After he went to bed, she sat by the window, staring at the faint lights outside. She wasn't angry or jealous, she was worried. Too many secrets had already surrounded their lives, and every time she thought things were becoming normal, something new appeared to shake it again. The next morning, Daniel left early for the office. Before leaving, he said quietly, "There's an event at the charity center tonight. It would mean a lot if you joined me." Lena nodded. She hadn't attended one of those gatherings in a while. When she arrived later that evening, Daniel was already there, talking to a group of people near the stage. He smiled when he saw her, guiding her gently to his side. "Everyone, this is my wife," he said proudly. The people around them smiled warmly, and for a moment she felt a sense of belonging. But as the event went on, Lena noticed something strange. Toward the back of the room, a woman in a dark coat seemed to be watching them. Every time Lena turned, she caught her staring. Her heart raced when she realized who it was. It was her sister. Lena froze. Clara stood near the doorway, half hidden behind a pillar, her eyes fixed on Daniel. She looked different, pale, thinner, but still carrying that same confident expression. Before Lena could decide what to do, Clara turned and disappeared into the hallway. Lena excused herself quickly and followed her outside. The night air was cool and the parking lot was dimly lit. She looked around, but Clara was nowhere to be seen. She called her name softly, but only the sound of the wind answered. After a few minutes, she returned inside, shaken and confused. Daniel noticed her pale face and asked gently, "What's wrong?" She hesitated, then said, "I thought I saw her again." "My sister?" His expression darkened immediately. "You're sure?" She nodded slowly. "She was here, watching us." Daniel took a deep breath. "Then it's starting again," he murmured. "Starting what?" Lena asked. He looked at her seriously. "Before you came, Clara tried to use my name for a loan through one of my partners. When it didn't work, she began sending messages to people, trying to damage my reputation. I thought she had stopped after I filed for protection. But now, if she's back..." He trailed off. Lena reached for his hand. "We'll handle it together," she said softly. That night, neither of them talked much, but there was a new closeness between them, an unspoken understanding that whatever came next, they weren't alone anymore. A few days later, a letter arrived again, this time addressed to both of them. The handwriting was neat and familiar. Inside was a message. "You think you've built a happy life on lies. The truth will come out soon." Lena stared at the letter for a long moment. There was no signature, but she didn't need one. Daniel crumpled the paper and threw it into the fireplace without saying a word. In the days that followed, things grew stranger. Someone began calling the house at odd hours. Each time Lena picked up, there was silence. Once she thought she heard breathing on the other end before the line went dead. The staff grew uneasy. Mrs. Grayson started locking the doors earlier than usual. One afternoon, while Daniel was at work, a delivery man arrived with a small package. "For Mr. and Mrs. Hale," he said. Lena signed for it and opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph, her and Daniel, taken from outside the mansion as if someone had been watching them through the window. Her hands shook. She called Daniel immediately. When he arrived home, he looked more concerned than surprised. "I was afraid this might happen," he said quietly. "What does she want from us?" Lena whispered. He looked at her with tired eyes. "Revenge, maybe, or attention. I don't know anymore." That evening, Daniel decided to install security cameras around the property. He spoke with a private investigator, too. "If she's following us," he said, "we'll find out." But deep inside, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that Clara wasn't just after revenge. There was something else she wanted, something she hadn't yet revealed. A week later, the investigator called. Daniel was in his study when the call came through. After a few minutes of quiet talking, he hung up and turned to Lena. They found her. Where? Lena asked quickly. She's been living in a small apartment downtown under a different name. They also found something else, a file she's been collecting. About me, about us. Lena felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of file? Photos, notes, copies of documents, he said grimly. She's been following every move we make. Daniel arranged to meet the investigator the next morning to collect the file. But that night, something unexpected happened. Around midnight, a loud noise woke them up. Daniel rushed downstairs and Lena followed close behind. The front door was wide open, the wind blowing through the hallway. When Daniel turned on the lights, they saw muddy footprints on the floor leading toward the study. His desk drawers were open, papers scattered across the carpet. Someone had broken in. Call security, Daniel shouted. But before they could do anything, Mrs. Grayson came running from the kitchen, breathless and frightened. I saw someone, she said. A woman. She ran out through the back garden. Daniel ran outside, but whoever it was had already disappeared into the night. Lena followed him to the porch. In the distance, the sound of a car engine faded away. On the ground near the garden gate, she saw a small silver pendant glinting in the grass. When she picked it up, her heart froze. It was her sister's. Daniel took it from her hand and stared at it quietly. This ends now, he said, his voice low. The next day, they went to the investigator's office. He handed Daniel a folder filled with documents and photos. One of them showed Clara standing outside Daniel's company building, watching him from across the street. Another was taken at the charity event a few days earlier. She's been following you both for months, the investigator said. But there's more. Someone's been paying her. Daniel looked up sharply. Paying her? Yes, the investigator said. We traced a few bank transfers under her alias. They came from an unknown account connected to one of your competitors. Lena's eyes widened. So this isn't just about us. Daniel nodded grimly. No, she's being used. Someone's feeding her lies, paying her to keep me distracted. It all started to make sense now. The timing, the letters, the photographs. Clara might have thought she was getting revenge, but she was a pawn in someone else's game. That evening, back at the mansion, Lena sat in the garden with Daniel. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. She turned to him quietly. Do you ever wish things had gone differently? He looked at her for a long moment before answering. Sometimes. But if they had, I might never have met you this way. Lena smiled faintly, though her heart still felt heavy. Even with everything that's happened? Even then, he said softly. The warmth in his voice made her eyes sting with tears. It wasn't a fairy tale, far from it, but it was real, and that meant something. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Daniel received another call. His face hardened as he listened. When? He asked sharply. All right. I'll be there. He hung up and turned to her. Clara's been found again. The police picked her up after she tried to break into one of my offices. Lena's heart pounded. Is she okay? She's fine, Daniel said quietly. But she's refusing to talk to anyone except you. Lena hesitated. Part of her wanted to stay away, to protect herself from more pain. But deep inside, she knew she couldn't keep running from this. I'll go, she said finally. The next morning, they drove to the police station together. Clara sat in a small room, her wrists resting on the table, her expression calm but distant. When she saw Lena, she smiled faintly. You came. Lena sat down across from her. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. Clara tilted her head. Because I wanted you to see the truth. He's not who you think he is. That's not true, Lena said firmly. You're the one being used. Someone's paying you to hurt him. For a moment, Clara's confident mask slipped. How do you know that? Because we found the records, Daniel said from the doorway. Clara turned to look at him, her eyes flashing with anger and something like shame. He stepped forward, placing a folder on the table. You were never the enemy, Clara. You just let the wrong people control you. Clara's lips trembled slightly. I thought they'd help me start over, she whispered. They said you ruined me. Daniel sighed deeply. You ruined yourself when you chose lies over truth. But it's not too late. There was silence for a long time. Then Clara looked at Lena. You really love him? Lena nodded. Yes, I do. Clara closed her eyes as if finally accepting something she had fought against for too long. "Then be careful," she said softly. "The people who used me, they won't stop. They wanted to destroy him completely." Before Daniel could ask more, a guard entered, saying the interview was over. As they walked out, Lena looked back one last time. Her sister was sitting still, staring at the floor, her expression unreadable. Outside, the sunlight felt strange, too bright after the heavy air of that room. Daniel looked at her. "You did well," he said quietly. "I think she's finally realizing what she's done." Lena nodded, though her heart felt heavy. There was no joy in seeing her sister defeated, only sadness for what they had lost. That night, they returned home in silence. As they walked through the garden, Lena reached for his hand. "Do you think this will finally end now?" He looked toward the lake, where the moonlight shimmered gently on the water. "I hope so," he said softly. "But people like the ones who used her, they don't stop easily." Lena squeezed his hand. "Then we'll face them together." He smiled faintly, pulling her closer. For the first time, she didn't feel like a replacement anymore. She wasn't living in anyone else's shadow. This was her life now, built on honesty, forgiveness, and a quiet strength she never knew she had. But deep inside, both of them knew one thing: the story wasn't over yet. The storm that had passed had left behind ripples that were still spreading, and soon they would learn that sometimes the hardest battles begin right after the calm. The days after Clara's arrest passed quietly, but there was a strange heaviness in the air that neither Daniel nor Lena could shake off. It wasn't fear anymore. It was the weight of everything they had been through. For the first time in months, there were no letters, no phone calls, and no shadow following them. The house felt peaceful again, yet somehow that peace didn't feel real. It felt borrowed, as if someone could take it away at any moment. Daniel spent more time at home now. He had moved some of his work from the office to the study, and Lena often brought him tea while he worked. Sometimes she would sit nearby reading quietly, and they would share small smiles without saying much. Their silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was warm, gentle, and full of understanding. One evening, while they were having dinner, Daniel said softly, "I've been thinking about what Clara said. About those people who used her." Lena looked up. "Did you find out who they were?" He nodded slowly. "The investigator found something. The same company that once tried to take over my firm, the one that went after me years ago. They've been moving quietly, buying smaller businesses under new names. Clara was just one of many people they used." Lena frowned. "So it's not over yet." Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. "No, but this time we'll face it together." That small promise meant more to her than anything. For so long, she had felt like an outsider in her own marriage. Now she was part of something real, something built not on fear but on trust. The next morning, Daniel left early for a meeting in the city. Lena watched him drive away, her heart full of quiet pride. She remembered the day she first came into his world, nervous, confused, and unwanted. Now she was no longer the frightened girl who had been forced into someone else's story. She had found her voice, her strength, and a love she hadn't even believed in before. Later that afternoon, she decided to visit her sister. She didn't tell Daniel. She didn't want to worry him. Clara had been moved to a rehabilitation center instead of prison. The judge had agreed to leniency because she had cooperated with the investigation and given evidence against those who had manipulated her. The drive there was long and quiet. The road curved through open fields, and the winter light made everything look soft and distant. When Lena arrived, Clara was sitting in the garden wearing a plain sweater and staring at the trees. She looked calmer, older somehow, as if the chaos had finally drained out of her. When she saw Lena, she smiled faintly. "You came," Lena nodded, sitting beside her on the bench. For a moment, they didn't speak. The only sound was the wind rustling through the leaves. "I heard you helped the police," Lena said finally. Clara gave a small laugh. "Helped maybe, or maybe I just got tired of running. You can't keep lying forever. It catches up to you one way or another." Lena looked down at her hands. "You hurt a lot of people, Clara, but I know you were hurting too." Her sister's eyes softened. "I thought I was doing what I had to. I thought money could fix everything. But the truth is, I just didn't want to feel small. I wanted to be seen, to be someone. And I guess I thought he was my way there." Lena didn't reply. She understood in her heart that everyone carried a different kind of pain. Clara's mistakes had been terrible, but they came from a place of emptiness. a hunger for love and recognition that she never found. After a long silence, Clara said quietly, "You love him, don't you?" Lena smiled gently. "Yes, I didn't plan to, but it happened." Clara nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "Then promise me one thing. Don't lose yourself trying to be what people expect you to be. I lost everything because I was always pretending." Lena reached out and squeezed her sister's hand. "I promise." They sat like that for a while,